Hi, here we are on the banks of the Grand Union Canal. Believe it or not, we're just 2 or 3 miles away from the M1 motorway. Wouldn't believe it to see the area in, would you? Hopefully today we're going to try our hand at catching a few fish on Bloodworm and Joker. It's a beautiful late autumn morning. Now in the summer, these particular pegs to our right here, under these trees, would have been absolutely full of roach. But as the leaves begin to deposit themselves into the canal, you tend to find that the fish tend to move away from the overcast areas and move into a little bit of open water. This particular peg here looks ideal. It's at the end of that group of trees, just before we go through a bridge. Now a couple of 3 weeks ago, I don't think I'd have fished this peg because it's under a very big tree. There will be a lot of leaves on that tree. They've almost all certainly gone now. All those leaves at some time or other would have been deposited into the canal. But with the boats and what have you, I dare say they've all been washed away. With a little bit of open bank, and hopefully the sun on the water in the next hour or so, we should catch a fair few fish here. In fact, I'll leave my tackle here, because there's a couple of pegs I want to look at just the other side of the bridge. I'd look at them a little bit earlier, but there was a couple of boats moored there. And I think they're still there, but if they have gone, who knows, there might be a better peg than this. I'll just have a walk through and have a look. It's a common feature on canals that whenever you do happen to get a bridge, the canal always narrows. For some reason, because the canal narrows, you tend to get deeper water quite close in. Certain times of the year this can be very good, especially late winter. I don't think the fish will be quite in that deep water at the moment, and therefore I'm going to walk a little bit further away from the bridge and show you this peg just up here. First of all, it's widened out now we've got past the bridge, and secondly it goes out into an even bigger bay just to our left. Now the problem was, up to 5 minutes ago, there was 3 boats moored there, so obviously the 2 boats have just left, stirred everything up, so I think the prospect of catching a few fish here now, well, are quite diminished. Yeah, I think I'll go back to the other side of the bridge. Before we start fishing, let's look at this peg in a little bit more detail. First of all, it's a wider part of the canal just before it goes into where it narrows for the bridge. I would expect the far bank to be quite shallow, simply because with the boats coming through it pushes a silt up onto those far ledges. Likewise on the near bank I would expect the boat similarly likewise to push the silt up onto the near side and give me a ledge about 3 or 4 metres from the bank. So the 2 lines I'll be fishing today will be about 3 to 4 metres from that far bank and 3 to 4 metres from this near bank. Before we even anticipate fishing, we've got to get ready. We've got to get the tackle ready, and as importantly, we've got to get the bait ready. So let's go. Right, the 2 pole rigs we'll be using today will be 8 metre with a short line and 3 metres with a long line. Now on our 8 metre rig we'll be using what's commonly known as internal elastic system. Basically we use a fine silicone elastic that is threaded through the centre of the tip section of the pole. It's plugged at the one end, obviously to prevent the fish pulling all the way through, and on the opposite end we have a little snap connector which connects onto the line itself. Now to prevent abrasion of the elastic we use a very soft PTFE tip. Now this is most important. If in fact we didn't have this, because of the sharpness on the end of the pole, it would actually sever the elastic, and who knows, in the middle of a big competition when that goes, it could well cost you the match. On our short pole long line methods we won't be using elastic. Basically we'll be using a very fine carbon tip. This is the shock absorber for this particular rig. Basically I'll be using a double rubber method for connecting the line, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. The 8 metre pole. Basically the business end will be the elastic tip, the first section and the second section, giving us around 2 metres of pole altogether. Now when we're actually fishing with this 2 metres of pole, the hook length will finish at my hands. So as we're fishing 8 metres across the canal, it will be then placed into the rest of the pole and progressively fed across the canal so. That is the 8 metre rig we'll be using. On the 3 metre pole rig, there we are, this is a metre of telescopic with the flick tip, and then 2 push-on sections. That now gives us 3 metres of pole. Again, the hook length will finish at the hand, but this time there'll be no unshipping of the pole. In actual fact, every fish we hook will be swung directly to hand and drop straight in the net. Right, now for floats itself. The 2 types of floats I'll be using today are quite different indeed. First of all, I'll be using these balsa-bodied with a cane insert and wire-stemmed floats. The main reason I'll be using these is, for inside I do like to catch fish on the drop over the last 2 or 3 inches. And with this cane insert, the dropper shot I'll be using actually gives me a very, very good bite indication. For the far side, I'll be using these Paparazzi floats. They have a very buoyant body, a plastic insert and a cane stem. And these floats will be used predominantly for catching roach on the drop. Hopefully, as the day warms up, these will come into very good effect. In true Blue Peter fashion, I have some already set up. Right, here's a float that's already set up on a winder. There's the same float again with the cane insert, the balsa body and the wire stem. It's already on 3 metres of line, and just tucked in here is the bulk that is normally positioned around 8 or 10 inches away from the hook itself. Beneath that bulk we'll have 1 or 2 very, very small number 12 and number 13 shots. I'll show you those when we actually put it onto the pole itself. For the far side, here's the rig again. Paparazzi float, plastic stem, plastic tip and cane stem with very, very small style leads, equi-spaced down the line itself. Again, this is onto about 2.5 metres of line, and we'll go into that one in a little bit more detail when it's actually connected to the pole. Right, how do we connect it to the pole? Firstly, long pole, short line, the Paparazzi float. As I mentioned earlier, we have a little hook effect on the end of the elastic. And basically, all we do, with the loop that's already formed on the end of the winder, passes over the hook, slide down the sleeve, and away we go. The line naturally falls off. And there's our hook and the rig ready to use. Now let's connect this Paparazzi rig to the end of our pole. On the end of the pole we had a very small sleeved connector. Basically the loop on the end of the line from the rig slides over the collar and then the sleeve pushes over. That is now permanent. Now there are other ways of doing this, but I've found this far simpler and I get in a lot less tangles by using this particular method. And then the winder falls away, leaving these all connected perfectly. What I do try to do is always try to make the rig length 3 or 4 inches less than the pole length I'm going to use, simply because it enables me to hook the hook at the end of the pole and then I'm ready for action. That's that setup. On the short pole long line method, I do connect the float a little bit differently. If you look closely, I have a loop on the end of the line and a plastic sleeve on it as well. I then form another loop and pass it through the existing loop. So I've got like a loop that can tighten up on itself. Over to the pole. The loop I've just formed then clips over to the end of the pole and pulls tight. That now locks up against the sleeve permanently positioned on the pole. Now that in itself would hold, but this extra rough sleeve then slides down the line and pushes over the end of the pole itself. We then have a system that is absolutely perfect and tangle free. So easy, yet it works every time. Likewise, we then pay the line off. Not quite as free as the last time, there we go. There we go. The rig finishes just at the end of the pole. For the time being, loop it over and we're ready for action. Right, before we actually start talking about bait, I think it will pay us to look at the rigs in much more closer detail. For that reason, I'll sit on my box. This is a damn sight more comfortable for starters. First of all, the Paparazzi Rig. As I mentioned earlier on, it's a very, very buoyant float, and for the actual size of the body of the float, it takes a substantial amount of lead. Right, beneath the Paparazzi float, I have spread evenly down the line some very small style leads. Now these are very useful little items of equipment. They actually clamp onto the line by means of a set of tweezers. I have these all the way down the line to the hook, which in fact is only on a 4 or 5 inch hook length. And the reason I do that is I don't like to actually put lead on the hook length itself. Because I'm only using a size 24 or 26 hook with either 8 or 12 ounce line, I have found that by actually putting lead onto that, you can weaken it quite considerably. So I try and avoid putting lead on that at all times. Now the style leads progressively get smaller as they come down. For argument's sake, the last two before the hook length itself are very, very small style leads. And as we go progressively away from the float, they get a little bit larger each time. Another beauty about style leads is they are so flexible. At the moment I've got them spread, but say for argument's sake I decided the fish were all concentrating feeding the bottom, 15 inches of water, I can quite easily slide them down the line. They do slide quite easily, providing they're put on properly. And form a little bit of a bulk, a little bit nearer the hook length. This has two advantages. First of all, it enables you to get your hook bait down to the feeding fish as quickly as possible. And, although it's in rare circumstances, if there are lots and lots of small fish going here, there and everywhere, it enables your bait to cut through the small fish and get down to the bottom where there are a few more bigger fish. That's a point worth remembering. For our inside rig, I'll be using the cane, balsa and wire based float. And as I'll be catching predominantly fish on the bottom this time, I just have a solitary bulk about 8 or 9 inches away from the hook. Now this is a tungsten olivette, and you might notice at the top of it there's a little bit of plastic tube. That acts as protection to save the tungsten olivette cutting through the line. And beneath it, I'll slide that one down a little bit further, I just have two very small shots. That is a number 13 shot, about 7 or 8 inches away from the hook, and this is another number 13 shot, just 4 or 5 inches away from the hook. Again, there's a 12 ounce hook length and a size 24 or 26 hook. Now I think I'll take time out here just to point out why I'm using two completely different rigs. Predominantly it's because of the species I'll be catching. On the inside line I hope to be catching gudgeon, perch and maybe an odd small ruff. Although the way the day is today, it's gone very, very cold indeed. I'll probably expect to catch a few more ruff than gudgeon. Now ruff and gudgeon predominantly feed right on the bottom itself. So the object of the exercise is to get the hook bait down to the bottom as quickly as possible. Hence, we use a bulk. Now these two very fine droppers work perfectly with this particular type of float. For the simple reason the bulk takes the float, when it's in the water, right the way down to the cane stem. And those two very small number 13 shots actually give you a perfect drop on the tip. So if actual fact, if a fish intercepts that bait, as those two number 13s are dropping, the float won't cock right the way down to the orange tip itself. Therefore, you end up with a good on the drop registration. Those are our two basic rigs, so let's now have a look at bait. In my opinion, it's as important, if not more important, than the actual terminal tackle itself. Right, let's have a look at the business end of the gear, the Bloodworm and Joker. First of all, the Bloodworms. Now you might notice now that I'm keeping them in a polystyrene box, simply because it keeps the moisture out and also keeps them at an even temperature. Now the Bloodworm is the larva of the midge. and it is found on the bottoms of pools, so they are in fact very, very difficult to obtain. I wouldn't advise anybody to go out on their own right and try and get them themselves, because they can be quite dangerous. 4 or 5 years ago they were very difficult to obtain, but now the majority of the tackle shops do actually sell them. They're not cheap, but for argument's sake, for a fishing competition, that is probably all you need. There's enough there to probably catch 100, 150 fish. And how often do you catch those on a canal? The Joker, although it comes from the same family, is very, very much smaller, but far livelier. Here we have them. Now you can see the difference in size straight away. This is in fact the larva of the gnat, and unlike the bloodworm, it's found on the bottom of very slow moving streams. Again, it's very difficult to collect. Here in this little pack there's probably around £3.50 to £4.50's worth. Now it might look quite expensive, but believe you me, there's a lot of fish in this pack here, and you'll have a thoroughly enjoyable day's fishing with them. Our ground bait. Right. These, in my opinion, are the secrets of success on bloodworm fishing. The main constituents I'll be using for the ground bait today will be this very fine damp lean that we import from Holland. For some unknown reason we can't seem to find it anywhere in England. It's only soil, but it's very fine, very fluffy, and it's beautiful for this time of the year because it doesn't actually give the fish anything to feed on, and it means the fish have then got to feed on your bloodworm and joker. The second part of the mix will be secret. This is a very good binding agent, although it does feed the fish a small amount. It's very gluey, and when mixed with water it can be a very, very hard mix, so only a little dash of that for today. The third mix is Super Cup. Now this Super Cup to me is the attractor. It's a lovely spicy smell to it, and it reacts well in the water, constantly fizzing and giving off little bits and pieces that actually attract the fish into the peg. I use Super Cup more than any other ground bait all the way through the year. Because it's winter, I'll be using a little bit more of this bulking agent lean. For argument's sake, if I was fishing in the summer, I'd probably cut out the lean altogether, and I'd just put a 50-50 mix of Secret and Super Cup. But it has been a little bit cold, and I definitely want the fish to eat the bloodworm and joker, so this is the mix I'll be using for today. Little dash of that. Mix it all up nice and evenly. And now for the tricky part, adding the water. There we go. Now this, without shadow of a doubt, is the most difficult part of ground bait preparation. Too much water and the whole mix will go sticky, gooey. In fact, it'll be impossible to use. The best way to do it is just to add a tiny bit of water at a time. Mix it in so all the water's absorbed, and you get a nice, even, consistent mix. See, it's not holding together as yet, therefore a drop more. Put too much in and it literally goes like concrete. Now we're getting somewhere near. Squeeze and it's starting to bind. In my opinion, the most important aspect of mixing your ground bait is, without a shadow of a doubt, the sieving. I use two sieves, one fairly fine and one not so fine. First of all, I run the basic mix through the coarse sieve, straight away those lumps. All the very fine stuff goes straight through, leaving the rougher stuff on the top. Just a little brush round, and that gets rid of those. That now is a much softer, much fluffier mix. But still with a squeeze, it forms a nice ball. And the beauty of it is, because we've got rid of all the hard, stodgy lumps, break it up, fluffs up beautifully. I do like to take it one stage further, through a fine sieve. Now this isn't necessary, but I do like to try and do things quite right. Run it through this sieve. Now if I was fishing in summer, these wouldn't bother me. But because fish are more difficult to catch late autumn and winter, you might as well do things dead right and take those out as well. The final mix, beautiful fluffy mix of ground bait, squeezes, binds perfectly, breaks up in the hand and disappears straight away. That is now ready to introduce to your swim. But there is one major ingredient missing, the joker. Let's put that across there for 1 second. Here's the joker back again. Now as you can see, at the moment, if I was to introduce this joker into the ground bait, it wouldn't disperse very evenly throughout the mix. So a little trick we move that out of the way. A little trick we tend to do nowadays: empty the joker into a container. Make sure you take your litter away with you, and introduce just a dab of this very fine dry clay. Look, just like powder. Little dab of that on top of the joker. A quick fluff up. There we are. All the jokers, all separated and all far more active. These are then introduced into the ground bait. Now a little tip I use at this time of the year is, get yourself another mixing bowl out. Quite simple. 3 handfuls of ground bait, 3 handfuls of ground bait, and 2 big handfuls of joker. In fact, that's just about right. All mixed up nice and evenly. That is now ready to introduce into your swim. A beautiful mix, guaranteed to pull all the fish for miles into your peg. Now there's one little thing that might happen before you're actually ready to introduce the ground bait to the swim. You'll tend to find that the ground bait might dry out a little bit. If you notice, when I squeeze, because of the content of the joker, it's still a little bit soft. So in order to dampen down, if you try and introduce water direct from the can like this, you'll end up back at square one with a very lumpy mix. In order to disperse the water quickly and efficiently, we use, very simply, a sprayer. Switch the sprayer on, fluff it up, just adds sufficient water to give that little bit of extra binding agent. Bingo, there you are, perfect water ground bait. Right, we've got the bait ready, we've got the rigs ready. Let's set ourselves up and start catching a few fish. Right, we're now ready to catch a few fish. Before I actually introduce any ground bait or start fishing, let's talk about the general tackle layout. First of all, the keep net. If you notice, I've staked it at that end and at this end. And the reason we do that is quite simple. With boats constantly coming through, the wash created by the boat can actually sweep your net through your peg. And if you can imagine, you're fishing quite close in, catching a few gudgeon and rough, you only want your net to roll through. End of story, no more fish. Secondly, on with bait. Well, today it's strategically placed on my left hand side on this little stand. If you ever want to introduce a ball of ground bait, it's just a matter of down into there, in with the ground bait, no bother standing up, reaching for things, it's all nicely laid out. My landing net. I always net my fish with my left hand. I've got a fish on my pole here, it's a matter of going out, netting the fish, putting the fish in the net, returning the landing net. It's there ready and waiting for the next fish. Another convenient piece of equipment is this pole roller. If you can notice, I've got a very high hedgerow behind me. It makes pushing the pole behind you very difficult indeed. To overcome this, we have this Duplon roller on the end of a bank stick, and as you can see, the pole rolls nice and conveniently up and down that. If you can imagine, I'm fishing on the far bank. And I have this very high hedgerow behind me. If for argument's sake I hook a fish and I want to pass the pole behind me, no chance at all. This pole roller makes things very easy. It's a matter of pole up in the air, onto the pole roller, slides back nice and easily, pull the pole apart, pole on the floor, fish to hand, and away we go. So very, very cheap, very, very useful piece of equipment. Right, before we go any further, let's talk about introducing the ground bait. First of all, on our inside line. It's always important, before you introduce your ground bait, to accurately plumb the depth. For this, we'll be using a clip-on plumb bob. Now this clip-on plumb bob operates simply by pressing the two tongs at the end, little jaws effect, and snapping onto your hook. That now overweights the float. As the plumb bob is dropped into the water, if you're fishing too shallow, the float stays on the surface. It's disappeared. As it's disappeared, we're fishing just a touch too shallow. So put 2 or 3 inches on. In other words, push the float up the line, introduce the float again. There we are. Just sticking out by about 1 inch. Now you have to be extremely accurate when you're fishing bloodworm, because joker bounces up and down within 1 inch of the bottom normally. So if I just drop the float by 1 inch, that should now be spot on. Yeah, just about perfect. So we now know exactly where the float is going to lie. I'm only going to introduce 2 small balls of ground bait onto this line, both quite hard, simply because there are 1 or 2 boats about today and I don't want the ground bait washed here, there and everywhere. I'll be introducing 2 small balls of ground bait onto the 3 metre line. In actual fact, just 2 balls of ground bait like that. This is an initial feed, and after that I'll be putting very small balls on top on a regular basis. So here we go. What's that? We can now leave that for a few minutes while we concentrate on feeding our far swim. Plumbing the depth on the far swim is exactly the same as plumbing inside. As I've already accurately plumbed that depth, what I'm going to do first of all is push the pole out into the position I want it, lower the hook and weight and floating gently, and get an accurate bearing of exactly where I want to feed. Now by simply tucking the pole between my legs, I'm ready to drop those balls of ground bait in. For that far line, I'm going to introduce 3 balls of ground bait, but all 3 balls of ground bait are considerably bigger than the ones I've fed inside. The reason for this is quite simple. On that far line, I'm trying to catch roach and a few bigger fish. Therefore, by introducing a little bit more food initially, I would hope that the small fish are probably pushed away from the feed by the influx of bigger fish. It's all trial and error. We'll see how we go. Now, these are the 3 balls of ground bait I'll be introducing to the far side. The first one has been made up very hard indeed, simply because I want it to go in and stay there for a long time. The second one, not quite so hard. I don't mind that breaking up in probably 15-20 minutes or so. And the last ball of ground bait is relatively soft. And the reason this is relatively soft, I want this one to hit the water, go down most of the way, and then spread out on the bottom to give me a nice wide area of feed. This is the difficult bit, accurately dropping the ground bait into the peg. This has got to be done accurately, simply because once it's in, you can't take it out. So here we go. One hard one, 2 hard ones, Now one is a little bit softer. Didn't sound it, but it was quite a bit softer than the initial two. Now that's a ground bait introduced to the fast swim. We'll now leave that for 15 to 20 minutes and hopefully concentrate on catching a few fish inside. Right, here we go. I'm starting off initially on a size 26 hook to 12 ounce breaking strain line and putting single bloodworm and putting on a single bloodworm. Now this is a very, very good stretch of canal indeed, and I would imagine after an hour or so I would probably want to step up to a bigger hook, simply because I would expect to be catching quite a few fish. Because it's been a cold night, we had a heavy frost this morning, I'll start on a very small hook and a single bait. Let's try and catch a few fish. You might have noticed what I did then was, I cast the pole float out itself and actually dipped the tip under the water and pulled it back towards me. And the reason to do that is quite simple. If not, I would have all the line on the surface between my tip of my pole and the float itself. Oh, I don't believe this, we're into a fish straight away. It's not often that happens, I assure you. Let's find another bloodworm. Cast out, sink the line. The bulk now settles the float. The bulk has now settled the float, and those two very small drop shots are now dropping the tip right the way down. Had a fish taken that bait while that tip was settling, we would have known, but the simple reason being that the float would have actually stood up out of the water. It hasn't, it's now settled. We now know the bloodworm itself is right on the bottom, hopefully amongst the shoal of fish. Oops, fish, there we go, oops. Well, that was hardly worth catching, was it? Right, here we go. It's amazing how much tow's on the canal when these boats go past. Back out again. Another bite, and here we go, another fish. There we go. This is a rough. Hopefully we'll have quite a few of these by the end of the day. And in between we expect to catch a few roach, a few perch and quite a few gudgeon. In actual fact, this little area we're fishing in today is steeped in history. As you drive into Ivory Bridge itself, you come past, well, the remains of a very small village and a solitary church. There's a gudgeon. As I was saying, you come in past the solitary church, and evidently back in the 17th century, just before the plague, there was a thriving little village there. But with the onset of the plague itself, the whole of the village was wiped out. And all that remains is a few hollow shells of the cottages and the church itself surrounded by gravestones. So I think I'll pack up just before it gets too dark, because it'd be quite easy going back past that. There seems to be a few smaller fish at the moment, but I would imagine one or two bigger fish will move in a bit later on. Keep that bait moving all the time. Oh, we got one. That's a bit better. Oh yeah. Now these are bonus fish on canals. You don't. I'll take it careful, this one, because to be honest, I don't think we're going to get many roach this size today. I'm going to play them in really slow. Minute. Now that's a real bonus today. Not a massive fish, But 5 or 6 ounces, maybe touching 7 ounces, it's a real bonus at the end of the day. Gently dropping back, landing net back in the position. Let's put a new big fresh bloodworm on. There's a few routes there, we want to make the most of it. Now the proper way to hook a bloodworm is just try and put the hook point through about the 3rd segment down. Now you can see here the bloodworm is in fact put onto a size 26, so the hook itself is very insignificant. But you can see how active the bloodworm is by being hooked to that particular part of the body. Hook the bloodworm too high up and you end up missing lots of bites because there's too much bloodworm trailing. Hook it through the middle and it tends to drain itself very quickly and you end up with a lifeless bloodworm on the hook. Here we go again. Oh, loads of fish. Oh, a nice big gudgeon this time. There you go. That's a gudgeon. 2 out of the last 3 fish I've caught have got the hook a little bit too far down inside them. That suggests to me I'm fishing just a little bit too deep. And I'm giving the fish just a little bit too much time to get the hook down. So I'm going to take just an inch off. And if I don't get a bite this time, I can always put that inch back on again. But if I do, we could have the answer with the bloodworm. Off we go. It's just... well, I obviously missed a bite there because the bloodworm's gone. Exhaust the shoal. I'd rather catch a few fish on this line and then go over onto my far line and attempt to end up catching fish from both lines. If I carry on fishing on this line, I'll catch and catch and catch till eventually I've exhausted the shoal completely. And then I won't have a second option when my far line dies. So just another couple of quick fish inside and I'll move across. Yes, full of fish now. One more. Mind you, to be honest, I don't really want to go across. I'm enjoying this now. And I would imagine, because I've been fishing this line for about an hour and a half, the fish would have moved onto it. I'm going to be greedy. I'm going to have one more and then I'm going to go over. It's a ball of ground bait. Oh yeah. Right, now I'm going to leave that line. I know it's sacrilege, but where I am. Because they will stay there now. And if my far line doesn't work, I can always come back on it. An interesting tip when you're fishing with this particular rig, with the elastic, when the elastic's dry, it doesn't seem to retract back into the pole. So just before you start fishing, dip the pole tip into the water, stretch the elastic, firstly to lubricate all the elastic. It goes in first time, every time. Let's see if I can surprise myself and catch a fish over there. This is another small roach. I seem to have took it on the drop over the last 6 or 7 inches. It's not a big fish, but oh, it is not too bad at all. No. It's a bit peculiar that I've caught the biggest roach I've had today inside, Let's see if we can get yourself another one. A little ball of ground bait. This is... yeah, there's a few fish there now. It's amazing how the fish just come in here. Small perch this time. We've got quite a few small perch, but first one we've caught over. Lovely looking fish. There's 5 stripes down his side. In fact, there's some very big perch in there. I've seen one weighed in one competition just short of £1. That's a very big fish indeed. For a winter match anyway. Another small fish. Another rough. Now, beautiful little fish. Now what I'm going to do is now, there comes a time in most competitions or most sessions on a canal when you're fishing with bloodworm, you don't actually want to put any more ground bait in because you sense that the fish are being overfed a little bit. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use what we call pole pot. Quite simply, it's a little plastic pot with a clip on the bottom. In fact, this one's made out of a film can from standard 35mm film. With a little plastic clip on the bottom that actually clips on top of your pole. Quite simple. Put that there. And into that I'm going to put virtually, we call it raw joker. All it is joker without ground bait. Now I atomise the joker just so it binds together a little bit. Make a little ball. Neat joker, no ground bait at all. That's just joker and the original clay. Pop that little ball into the cup. Press it down very gently. If you press it down too tight, the stuff doesn't normally come out. And feed the pole very, very gently across to the far side. Just keeping the pot upright all the time. Lower your floating gently where you've been fishing. Drop the pot on top of the float and deposit the bait into the peg like so. Off with the pot. Hopefully we should now catch some fish. Right, here we go. Let's see if we can get ourselves... Oops. Must admit the night's drawing in very quick at the moment. The sun seems to have gone down very rapidly. In fact, it's going quite chilly. Well, there appears to be a few roach there now. I've already had 4 or 5 roach. Nothing big at the moment, but there's a few there. The problem is now there's 2 boats coming through the swim. Easy remedy. Pole up in the air. There we are, nice and simple. Now there's one thing you've got to be careful of when you're doing that. There's been quite a few people seriously injured lately by being electrocuted by holding poles up into the air. So just make sure that when you do decide to settle down and fish your stretch of the canal, there's no high tension cables or anything like that anywhere near you. To be honest, I always switch to canals around the end of October, and the main reason is simple. First of all, there aren't as many boats as we get in the summer, and secondly, I do think the fishing is far better in late autumn, early winter than it is in the summer anyway. Oop, I think we've got one. This feels a little bit of a better roach, so we've got to be a little bit more careful than this. The elastic seems to be coming out at the end. It's a matter of threading the pole gently back. Yeah, it's definitely a bigger fish. Ooh. We'll net this one, I think. Whoops, watch me net. There we go. That's a better fish. About 3 or 4 ounces. Not a specimen, but well worth catching today. Well, the light's fading quite fast now. Very cold this morning when we first got here. Had a lovely midday. As you can see, the light's fading very quickly, and I've only got probably 5 or 6 minutes left of proper fishing time. I've had a super day's fishing. Not a big bag of fish, probably 3 or 4 pound. I've had some rough, I've had some small perch, I've had some gudgeon. I've had 2 or 3 nice-ish roach, not big fish, 3 or 4, 5 ounce. All in all, a very nice canal mixed bag. What you've got to realise today is I've been fishing a method that I enjoy fishing most of all. That's bloodworm pole fishing. But there are literally dozens and dozens of ways you can fish your local canals without going to the expense of buying bloodworm and joker. For the sake of a few pence, you can come down on the canal with a few maggots. And if providing you pick the right peg, you can catch fish to your heart's content. Pinkies, squats, casters, bread punch, all methods work on all canals. Whatever you enjoy doing, go and have a crack. You might be very surprised at what you might catch. For many years the canal system's been neglected by anglers. It's only in the last 3 or 4 seasons that canal fishing has really come to the fore. And I would anticipate in the next few years you're going to see a lot more anglers on the canal bank. Hopefully sport will improve as the more anglers actually turn out onto the towpaths and catch fish. But I'm quite happy with my 3 or 4 pound bag of fish today. Before it gets too dark, let's just have a look what we have got. Here they are. Not a mammoth bag of fish as I says, but a very enjoyable day's fishing indeed. I'll just show you what exactly fish and what species we've caught. Yeah, there's the biggest roach of the day. You can see 2 or 3 nice roach. This one's probably 2.5 ounces. That one's probably what, 4 or 5 ounces. A few gudgeon. Literally thousands of these in here. But you tend to catch more of these in the summer than you do in the winter. In fact, on the Oxford Canal, on one particular competition, I ended up catching 13 pounds of these. That's just under 700 fish. So you can see what prolific species they are. The rough, let's just show you this. Look at that. A real nasty set of spines. Harmless, not poisonous at all. Quite easy to catch, thoroughly enjoyable. Putting a net of those together. And in here somewhere, there's a one-off, there's a small dace. Where he is, I don't know. No, I can't find him, he's in there somewhere. But I've been out the water quite long enough. There we are, probably 3.5, 4 pound of fish. Smashing. Well, that's it then. If you're ever walking along the canal path and you happen to bump into me, don't hesitate to come up and say hello. Likewise, I'll do the same to yourself. All I can really say now is enjoy your canal fishing, and I'll see you all again. Bye. And don't forget, take your litter home. There's nothing worse than turning up with loads of litter everywhere. Well, I'm off. I'll see you on the cut sometime.